Hello, I'm Natasha Reardon, and it's a pleasure to welcome you to St. Martin in the Fields. I can't quite believe that we're already halfway through our brand new concert series, Fresh Horizons. And for the 7th concert this evening, we're delighted to welcome the Academy of St. Martin in the Fields back to their spiritual home. Ahead of the performance, I'm joined by 4 members of the orchestra to tell me about what we're going to hear. Oboist and cor anglais player Rachel Ingleton, Steve Sterling from the horn section, cellist Will Schofield, and harpsichordist John Constable. Hello everybody, welcome.
Hello.
Thank you for joining me. So I'm just going to ask a very broad question to start with. Could somebody tell me what's on tonight's programme?
Yeah, well, we have 3 works for you. The first is the Random Concerto, the number which I've just forgotten.
6.
Thank you very much. Which is for a group of 2 solo violas and a small string ensemble and a harpsichord. Followed by a wind quintet by James Macmillan called Untitled, which has a slight twist to it. It uses a cor anglais instead of an oboe. And we're finishing up with the Brahms Second Orchestral Serenade.
So the cor anglais, Rachel, that's obviously your instrument.
Yes, yeah.
So it adds a completely different sort of warm sound, doesn't it, to Untold?
Yes, it does. It's a more mellow sound than the oboe, so it's slightly less intrusive in the wind quintet. And I think I don't know about you, I think it blends really well with the horn and the clarinet also.
Yeah.
I've never played with that format before. I mean, I've doubled. There are various quintets like the Hindemith where you do a little bit of cor anglais in the middle, but I've never played an entire quintet just on cor anglais. So yeah, really enjoyed it.
And that piece is just so distinctive of James Macmillan's sound, sort of really pure and luminous, and it seems to work really, really well in this space.
Felt pretty atmospheric, didn't it? I think Steve's the
absolutely.
James Macmillan expert because you did a solo
Well,
horn piece,
I've done a
didn't
few
you?
pieces of James Macmillan and composer I've come to really admire and enjoy playing a lot. And this particular work it has several levels to it. It's based on an Irish folk song, which is about a priest who's fallen in love with his brother's wife, and for all of Ireland won't tell her name, so he's keeping this a secret to himself. But it's also the folk song is in the form of, I think it's pronounced aisling or ailing, I'm not quite sure, I don't have an Irish background, but it's a slow air, and those slow airs sometimes represented Ireland in the form of a damsel in distress and asking for help from a poet. So I don't know where James Macmillan has found all the inspirations, but this work has many, many, many levels to it. It's utterly beautiful, and it has little poignant moments and moments of intrusion. It's a great work to play.
I'm so glad that you told me that, because when I was trying to look online about the origins of the piece, and James says in his note that the folk song is the starting point, I then couldn't find out what this folk song was actually about. It seems to be shrouded in a little bit of mystery, and that seems sort of perfect in a way for the music, because as you say, it's got these multi-layered textures, and it just uses fragments of the folk song, but it's a nice sort of rendering of it, but you don't hear the whole thing, and it's the sort of lovely sort of in and out and floating instruments and moments of
it's
silence.
not an arrangement of the folk song.
No.
It's not. He doesn't take the tunes, so he's used it as his inspiration, but it's not just a straightforward.
There's some lovely kind of glimpses of like a kind of waltz. We thought it sounded like a bit of a drunken waltz that come through, particularly on the flute, don't they?
Yes,
but
yeah.
I mean, it's got a lovely kind of lilt like you'd expect with a folk song as well.
Yeah. Well, that's the highlight of the wind section. The Brandenburg Concerto No. 6. What's really lovely about it is it's a chance for the lower strings to shine. We don't have any violins tonight, do we?
Exactly. There are no violins, and I sort of think there's this just tiny little subversive element to the fact that we've got no violins today. And there's this lovely story, I don't know if it's true or not, but Bach apparently wrote this piece, although he wrote it or sent it to this Margrave of Brandenburg, who was the brother of the King of Prussia and so on. He wrote it when he was in employment in Curtin, where he was employed by another prince, Prince Leopold, who was a keen viola da gamba player. And the piece is written for 2 violas, what we call violas now, which he called viola da braccio, so it's held up by the arm, and 2 viola da gambas, which we're playing on cellos today, but these are bass viols, so they're low instruments, and then a cello and a bass, and harpsichord, John. And Prince Leopold, Bach's employer, was a keen viola da gamba player. And what's lovely about this piece is that all of the court musicians would have been effectively servants, and the violas take the lead role, and the viola da gambas really are subservient to the violas. So there's this beautiful kind of little touch of irony that he probably liked to think that this was played in the court in Curtin, and the prince had to follow the servants. And so there's a sort of element of that tonight. I feel like with the orchestra, that the lid's been taken off, the crust's been taken off the top of the pie, the violins, and we all get a chance just to have our go a bit, I suppose. And
Bach's just really too clever for us all, isn't he?
You're right, but also the lovely he's so clever. But the thing is that the music is so complex. There's all these canons going. The music's all kind of very intricately woven together. But at the same time, it's just fun. It just feels like we're playing dance music.
Well, I think it's my favourite Brandenburg Concerto. I mean, we played the third a lot.
Yes.
And we played earlier in this series the fourth with 2 flutes and violin. But there's something special about this. It's a totally different sound because of the loneliness of it, and it's got one of the most beautiful slow movements that Bach ever wrote, in my opinion. I love it. It's wonderful.
Well, it's so rich, isn't it? It's so
yes,
mellow.
It's a different sound from anything else.
Yes, it's sort of, I don't know, when I was listening to the rehearsal earlier, it's really familiar music, but hearing it live, as obviously at this point in time is such a privilege, but you sort of think, how low is he actually going to go? Because it is just so deep in the base of the instruments.
And the slow movement is so sad. It's quite incredibly sad.
But then it goes into this incredibly joyous.
Yes,
thing,
exactly.
I just
a
remember
dance movement.
Yes, it's dance music. It's like a jig, isn't it?
Yes.
I mean, how difficult and how long do you think it took Bach to write this piece? Because I know when he assembled the concertos to send to the Margrave, he was looking at music he'd written before and putting things together, because obviously he has lots of maybe scraps and unfinished things that are perfect because he is Bach. And it's so technical, yet do you think it sort of came to him? How difficult would it be?
I think he wrote very fast, always. When you consider that he had to write a cantata for almost, when if you'd like to think the things he wrote, and there are over 200 cantatas, sometimes taken from something else, but on the whole, all new. So he was a speedy composer.
And also at that time, he was also rehearsing the choir and working with all the musicians.
Yes,
he had a busy job quite apart from composing.
Yes.
And I think we sort of underestimate how much music's probably lost as well, because we have a huge corpus of it now, but there's probably so much that we don't know about.
Isn't there a story about the manuscript for these concertos that it was almost lost during the war? I think they were trying to get it to safety, and it was on a trip. Somebody ran in, it was literally saved by one person carrying it under their coat.
Well, thank you to that one person.
Yes.
Rachel, could you tell me a little bit about what's coming up in the schedule for the Academy?
Yes, we got some really, speaking as a wind player, we got some really interesting opportunities, and John and I were just talking about a small chamber music concert in May, which features oboes. We got a piece by Thea Musgrave called Take 2 Oboes, which as yet, I've listened to it, but I haven't ever played it myself yet, so that's exciting. And she writes fantastically for the oboe. I've played some cor anglais music by her and other oboe things. And also in that programme there's Zelenka trio sonatas, which are 2 oboes and bassoon and continuo. And I'm just thinking it's a bit of a lip bender for the wind players doing all of that. But I mean, the Zelenkas are amazing. Can you remember how many sonatas he wrote? There must be.
Well, I don't know how many he wrote, but it's most
duration.
unusual in these days. I don't think I've ever played with the Academy, or for many years, things which are wind and continuo. It's just marvellous to have a chance to play that sort of music. But I originally, when I first started in the profession, I had a trio, a flute, oboe and piano, and we even did lots of broadcasts. I don't think you'd be allowed to play Baroque music with a piano on the BBC these days, but it's just wonderful music and a chance to play it. And everybody will love it, I think. New music which isn't often played.
And I think in that same programme is the Janacek Melody, which is the most fantastic piece, and that's a wind quintet with an extra player, a bass clarinet, and it's just such an atmospheric piece. Absolutely love it. I think that's in that same programme.
So I'm not certain about
I'm not
that.
sure
No,
that. I think we might have.
Is it in a different one? Well, it's in
Well,
one coming
it's in
up
the
soon
series.
anyway.
Yes, it's in the series for
Yes.
sure.
Yeah,
for
it's
sure.
in the
Yes.
series, and I mean that's just a fantastic piece. Yeah.
So you're playing so much incredible music, and Zelenka is a composer we don't hear much of, sadly, and that's brilliant that we'll be able to hear some from you. What's your programming technique? How do you bring these combinations of music together? Who is in charge?
We have two players here who are on the programming
Well,
committee.
We formed a little bit of a programming committee drawn from the orchestra, and to deal with this new situation and to deal with potential for programs that would have to be streamed, programs that we'd have no audiences, and to give us work, to start off with the basis of creating some work that would keep us ticking over during lockdowns. And we gave ourselves a brief that we would make it interesting, that we would try and include something by a living composer in every program, and then we just went a little bit outside of the Academy's history of playing the great popular classics, which is what we've done for a very long time, and just stretch our wings a little bit, because a lot of these programs will be unconducted. So we just let our imaginations go rip and pooled our collective experience, I would say.
It's the first time we've really been able to program music ourselves that we really want to play. Because normally, I mean, we're so lucky that we have such a rich touring schedule, but when you tour, you so much have to take, there's so many things to take into consideration, so many people's opinions, and we do try to please everyone, and inevitably we do find ourselves playing our traditional repertory, which is great, there's nothing wrong with it. But this is, I think it's, I mean, I've not been playing with the orchestra as long as certainly John and Steve, but I've been playing with the orchestra for, I'm not sure, 27 years or something, and this is the first time I think we've ever been able to just program the music we want to play. And we're so lucky to have this opportunity to do it in this amazing church. We're really grateful.
Well, I think it's wonderful to be able to have a program which includes Baroque, classical, romantic, 20th century, and completely modern, which you don't often get, particularly in the Academy. We often haven't done that sort of thing. But I think it's a wonderful new opportunity to hear all these things and play them. It's wonderful. And
it showcases the players as soloists as well, which we don't normally get to do.
Yes.
You know, normally in a traditional programme on tour, we would have an amazing soloist, but we don't often, you know, apart from playing solos within the orchestra. So it's a really nice challenge as well.
I think obviously the last year has been incredibly challenging for everybody, and especially musicians, but from conversations I've had during Fresh Horizons with groups, it feels like there's been a real sort of re-energizing, and it sounds like that's what's happening for you as well. And I think, as you say, once you've got such an incredibly established reputation as a group, I can imagine touring, people may want to hear the same sort of things over and over again. So it must be nice to be able to reframe yourselves and as you say, put yourselves sort of at the front, thinking about solos. And you know, tonight's concert, I think, is just such a thoughtful program. And when I was reading about it, I was just thinking, you know, a lot of care has really gone into picking these pieces, and they really, really complement each other. And I wanted to ask you, do you feel that sort of against that backdrop of negativity, this sort of re-energizing, are you getting a sense of musical satisfaction from looking at things in a different way?
I think it's a really trite thing to say, but sometimes you don't know how much something means to you until it's gone.
Yeah.
And I think for me, the most emotional moment was when I was able to meet we're friends, we're dear colleagues, and to meet again and just rehearse, just play music. And somehow, although sadly we can't have an audience in our concert today, it's just an absolute joy and a privilege to come and play with them and hear. It's sort of an orchestral concert, but it feels like a chamber music concert, even though it's quite a large group.
I think it's such a special job to be a musician, and it's very difficult to describe to people who aren't doing it, especially when you're in it constantly, you're touring, you're packing your suitcase. But there's something about not having very much of it at the moment and then hearing a live concert, there's another part of your brain which is reawakened, and it's very emotional. I think it's very tangible that you're all sort of connecting with each other in a much deeper, not more meaningful, but I don't know, that sounds a bit trite too, but it just feels really special, I think.
I think it's, having had small numbers of people in an audience, all distance, it's quite an unusual experience and feeling, but looking at them and hearing their reactions afterwards, it's clear how visceral it is for an audience to come and sit in and listen to a live concert. We're all at the performing end of things, but quite how affected and how moved people are by concerts is something I've sort of forgotten about over the years. It's been very touching.
And without an audience, do you then feel like you're sort of playing more for each other than before?
Think about that, I think.
I don't know, it's hard to say when we do the concert. I'm not quite sure. Rehearsing just feels very joyous. I think probably when we do the concert without an audience in front of cameras, it might feel a bit odd, but I think we'll just have to be listening to each other and just enjoying that and forgetting about.
One of the positive things about this is that one has been able to, thanks to streaming and this sort of thing, one can hear live performances. I remember there was one thing from Paris when they did the Strauss Metamorphosen with Capuçon and friends in a completely empty Boulez Hall in Paris. It's one of the most moving things I've ever heard, because that piece summed up the agony of what was going on in the first lockdown. Somehow you felt, yes, this is it. And we're all experiencing this, which you wouldn't have had if you hadn't had, if we had just were only going to concerts and you couldn't hear and see things.
Well, I think tonight's concert is sort of the opposite of that, because there feels like there's something really positive about the music that's on the programme, especially the Brahms, because it's not a piece that I know particularly well, but it's just joyous. There's something really sort of, I don't know, there's not a lot of early Brahms orchestral writing because he was weighed down by Beethoven and he took a long time to write his first symphony, etc., etc. I think sometimes the early things get a bit overlooked, and the serenade is just, it's an absolute gem, isn't it?
Well, it's a serenade, and it follows on in that amazing tradition that was largely comes from Mozart. Mozart, of course, took over from thousands of serenades and things written by Haydn, but this was essentially aristocratic entertainment music, but and often several movements long. So Brahms is definitely following on from that tradition. Beethoven and Schubert both wrote most amazing serenades, and Brahms is simply continuing that tradition. It's a mistake to think of it as just as an exercise in preparing to write symphony, because he was following on from an old tradition. And it's festive music.
It is festive, and it just feels bright and cheery and like what we all need right now, I think.
But the slow movement isn't.
No, it does have dark moments.
It has its moments.
But the dance movements are amazing, and that first scherzo, it's ridiculous, isn't it?
Oh,
it's like an absolute knees-up. It's people having a party.
It's interesting that the last thing we played on tour was Brahms 4 with Josh Bell last March, and we came back on, I think, like March the 8th, which it's almost a year within a couple of days, and it was like a hugely successful tour, and we all loved playing Brahms with no conductor, and then here we are tonight about to play the Brahms Serenade.
It does have a different feel, doesn't it?
Yeah.
That tour was amazing.
And the last ever concert we did before lockdown was in this church. It was Bach Suite in B minor, wasn't it, with a flute solo, which they were meant to be doing in Spain, but of course it was cancelled. We all knew it would be.
So it's the perfect venue and the perfect programme to welcome you back, and we're really, really looking forward to it, and to your next programme as part of Fresh Horizons with John Butt. So thank you very much for taking the time to join me. Really looking forward to your concert this evening.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Yeah.